Hey guys! So in this video I wanted to talk about the reasons I got my first tattoo. It is sacred geometry, and those of you who know what sacred geometry is probably know that it has a really spiritual context. It also has a scientific context, and I just want to show you my personal reasoning and experiences that led me to get this tattoo permanently on my body, and just why it means so much to me. So thanks for watching, and let's get into it. So if you recognize sacred geometry, you'll probably recognize that it's a modification of Metatron's cube. Metatron's cube is deviated from the flower of life, which is this really cool symbol that's been found all over the world in countries that could not communicate, so like in Egypt and in China. Let me do a little backtracking and talk about how I went from a really closed-minded individual who really saw the world from a materialistic point of view where everything is separate. I thought I was completely separate from everything else. I thought that my consciousness was just being generated from my brain, and it was just like biological chemical signals that made me, and when I died I would probably just die with my body. So I want to talk about how I went from that to someone who is very into spirituality. Interestingly enough, the way I got into this was actually through science. Now that might be surprising, but hear me out. So studying biology, I started to realize that things that I always thought of as material, dead, definitely not alive, were actually really flowing with this kind of life force. And what you think of as separate is actually not separate. Everything is unified by something that scientists are calling the unified field of instruction of the way the physical world behaves. So we look at reality and we think, okay, we can describe it using biology. There's an organism, there's ecosystems, but then you go further into that and you say, okay, well, these biological organisms are all following physics, in the whole natural world, including living organisms, including what goes on in your cells, is following physical rules like osmolarity, gradients, the way that our biology works on a cellular level. That's all following physics. And then if you go beneath that, there's the chemistry. So the actual molecules are atoms that are following really specific behaviors. And then below that is geometry. The reason that chemicals have the forms that they have is because of their chemical geometry that will manifest on our level as a different element. So earth, water, fire, air, and space. So that is what got me into the Platonic solids. So Plato had this whole philosophy that there are perfect forms that the whole universe follows and is sort of like fractaling out of, and then you can get it to a simplified version, which is just going to be straight up geometry, and I thought that was like the most interesting thing I had ever heard in my life. Okay, so Metatron's cube contains all of the Platonic solids, the shapes that have equal sides, and he correlates them to the elements. It also contains a lot of perfect ratios, golden ratios, so it might look similar to something you've seen by Leonardo da Vinci, where he draws the man in the circle. He's using perfect ratios that he found in nature to make perfect artwork, and that was also like really mind-blowing for me, because I realized that even though we feel like, oh, we're so separate, we're humans, like we're separate from the natural world, we are following the patterns of the natural world. Even though we might be so small, we are a manifestation of the rules that make up everything. So in that way we are connected to everything, and that is just so amazing. You should look this up. You'll see that the ratio phi is found in birds, in pretty much all natural designs. That's really cool to me. We might be separate, but we are completely connected to the universe. And if you look on an atomic level, you will not be able to separate the human from its surroundings. There's no like actual boundaries. There's a really cool line by Alan Watts where he says that a thing is a think, because what is a thing? Okay, so we can be like, oh, that's a human, but the human is defined by its society, and we're just choosing to look at these boundaries that are just made up. A human is not just a human, it's a product of its entire past, it's a product of its entire society. Like physically, on a scientific microscopic level, it is connected to everything. So the only reason that we believe things are separate is because our brains are able to conceptualize the idea of separation when separation does not in fact exist. And that is what this tattoo just reminds me of. Everything might seem separate, but it is actually all a part of this unified field, this collective all. And that is basically the basis of where my spirituality started and where my mind became opening to these spiritual ideas, spiritual concepts, and I began really seeking out information that I probably will go into in more detail later on. Right now I'm just kind of starting to get comfortable talking about this because it's like something I don't really talk about that often. A lot of people don't really get it, or I'm not able to explain it because I have the entire context of how my mind opened up to this in my head, and they don't have that context yet, and I don't really know how to portray it to them, and I don't really feel like it's my place. I kind of feel like it's part of everyone's journey. It's one thing to like be told something, and a completely different thing to actually experience the realizations for yourself. I think this is how religion got so messed up. People were just being told words, and then people were looking at the words and not at what the words were pointing to, and I think that there's a true basis to pretty much all religion, just the realization that we're all one. But anyways, back to my tattoo. There's another reason I got it, and it's because Metatron's cube is about balance. So it is a representation of some of the perfect proportions. Every simplified proportion that illustrates the natural world is contained in it. It's really about perfect balance. So I don't know if any of you have read much about Buddhism, but it's about like the middle way, the way between both pillars. People tend to swing from one pole to the other, and then there's something that underlies it that's beyond this duality concept, that's sort of like the center of creation, and that is love and perfect balance. It's stopping the pendulum, stopping swinging from side to side, and really being grounded and centered, and that's what Metatron's cube means to me. Like, my whole life I've tended to swing from one extreme to the other extreme, so having a lot of energy and wanting to do a ton of stuff to having no energy and just wanting to lay around. And I struggled for a while with this binging and restricting cycle. So this is just a reminder to me to find balance in my life. I don't need to keep swinging from one side of the pendulum to the other, and it's just another reminder that for every extreme there will be another extreme. So it's kind of like taking a more maintainable approach to things. Okay, so with the flower of life that it was derived from, I realized that there was a story of creation, and this was really, really cool news to me. It made so much sense. I would definitely suggest looking into this, but people describe it as, so imagine there is nothing. There's completely nothing whatsoever. And then spirit becomes aware of what's surrounding it, and that makes one circle. And then after that, spirit moves to the edge of the circle and becomes aware of what's around that. So then it makes this shape. I don't know if you can see this. And that's called the Vesica Pisces, and that is where a lot of information from light came from. Within that, there's a lot of ratios that describe, okay, so like what makes the color red different from orange. There's a specific wavelength for each, and that information is contained in the Vesica Pisces. And also the concept of duality. So there's two sides to things. So we only know one thing from comparing it to another thing. We only know this present moment because the past moment was different. We only know hot because we know what cold is. So that concept was created with the second circle. And then creation moves around like this, and this pattern is created, and it's a pattern of perfect balance, perfect equilibrium. And I read somewhere something that was really cool that said that if all matter was laid out like that, there would be nothing, because there would be no interference between anything. It would just be all perfect equilibrium. There probably wouldn't be anything whatsoever. And then it's from interference of that initial form that created this, like, amazingness, because it wasn't in perfect equilibrium anymore. And that was just, like, don't take my words, like, as truth or anything. This is just me expressing some cool findings and cool ideas that I came across during the beginning of my spiritual journey when I got this tattoo. Oh, another cool thing about this tattoo is the circles represent feminine energy. So feminine energy is represented as a circle because it is more abstract. It doesn't just get from point to point, it flows, it's more creative, and you look at female bodies, they're curvier than male bodies, and then the lines represent logic, getting from point to point, and this is the masculine energy. Another thing that led me to like my open-mindedness to these kind of spiritual teachings is that in quantum mechanics, we've tried to pin down the smallest particle, and we cannot. We've discovered that its behavior depends on the observer, so the actual consciousness viewing it. If we try and pin it down, we only know the probability of where it will be, so we can't really say that it's a material world exterior to us. Maybe consciousness isn't just a byproduct. Maybe we are tapping into consciousness in this human form. So that got me thinking about that. There's a ton of videos out there trying to explain quantum mechanics with consciousness theories, and that got me really excited. That got me into a lot of spiritual teachers. That got me into Buddhism because Buddhists have known this for a long time with the chakras. They've realized that everything's energy and there's energy flowing through us in these sort of forms, and we have different emotional bodies, astral bodies, energetic bodies, our auras, and there's a lot more than meets the eye. And that's really how science got me into this whole thing, just realizing that there is so much more than meets the eye, and how can we throw out all of these things when we basically through science know that we know nothing. It just doesn't make sense that we should throw away all of these things where what they did, like all of this geometry, the pyramids, they built the pyramids in a really specific way. The coordinates were an exact ratio of like the Earth's diameter or something like that, and it was exactly facing true north. There was just so many crazy coincidences that I really don't believe were coincidences. I believe that they knew this stuff through esoteric means, and then when this era of materialism came about, science just threw out everything else to try and prove God. That was the point of science initially, to try and prove God, and we sort of have lost sight of that, trying to explain the universe. Like, is there really a need to say that there's God? Like, obviously God isn't going to be like a person, but if we have all the rules of the universe, isn't that like enough to say that the universe is intelligent, and we can basically say that the universe is God? I don't know. These are just some of my ideas. So once I got into that kind of thing, I started reading more about Buddhism and people who have had these spiritual awakenings, because the idea of a spiritual awakening and actually the physical experience that you are a part of everything no longer was something that I was closed off to. With the realization that we are in fact connected to the entire universe, like chemically, geometrically, physically, like that everything might be energy, that the world might not actually be so material the way that we perceive it. I really was open to the idea of enlightenment and the physical experience of transcending the body and being a part of something bigger and feeling that experience. So I started looking into people like Eckhart Tolle, Adyashanti, and just other gurus. I bought a couple of books. I've been on YouTube a lot. And I've also been trying to also look at the scientific side, so I don't want to like just lean way too far to one side and get caught away in some whole new sort of dogma. I kind of want to know like all sides of how people view reality and piece it together based on similarities and based on my intuition. So I also bought some books. One of them's called Beyond Biocentrism, and that book is really cool. It goes a lot into quantum mechanics and how time might just be a concept we use to perceive the world. It might not actually exist in the way we think. It's the idea of looking from a dimension outside of time where time is just one point. Well, other books. I have a few other books that, like, if you guys are interested, I'll be willing to share with you or give kind of a review thing. Oh yeah, also, I was reading this book on chakras, and it mentioned Metatron being an archangel. So Archangel Metatron is an angel of spirituality in the human experience. So I feel like once these ideas started coming up, they kind of like made me feel really detached from our current paradigm in the way that we go about our lives as humans. I just kind of felt detached from society, like what's the point when I'm curious about like the meaning of why I'm here and stuff like that. And Archangel Metatron is supposed to help people who are spiritually inclined integrate that into their human experience. So that has been a really important thing for me throughout this process and throughout wondering all these things, being able to apply it to being human instead of just like theorizing about it. I feel like a lot of philosophers spend their whole lives just theorizing about things and not actually applying their theories, when the time here in this body as Sarah that I have is so limited, and I don't want to spend it just thinking about things and stressing myself out about concepts and making realizations into concepts. I actually want to hold these realizations and use them as myself, as Sarah, grow as a human instead of having this sort of detached perspective of myself, which I feel like has sort of been the reason I'm not really that into Buddhism anymore. It's because I feel like I'm here to experience Sarah in a very specific way, and I'm not really interested in that self-detachment. So that is the end of this video. Enjoy these images of my tattoo. I think it's really beautiful. I'm planning on possibly adding some more to it, sort of. It's very simple right now, which I like, but I think I could maybe work with an artist and figure out something to make it a little more like personalized, I guess. I hope you guys enjoyed parts of this video. I know it was kind of all over the place, and I hope that I did a good job editing, because if I didn't do a good job editing, it's probably not going to make any sense. So yeah, peace and love.